I thought Sarah was giving a heartfelt toast at my wedding. Instead, she revealed the shocking truth about my fiancé that shattered everything I believed about love. The champagne glasses were still clinking when Sarah stood up at the head table. My heart swelled with anticipation as she reached for the microphone. We'd been inseparable since college, through late-night study sessions, failed relationships, career changes, and every milestone that mattered. She knew me better than anyone, and I couldn't wait to hear what she'd say about this perfect day. The reception hall fell quiet as she tapped the mic. I was glowing in my dress, still dizzy from the ceremony an hour earlier. My new husband squeezed my hand under the table, both of us beaming as we waited for Sarah's words of wisdom and love. But instead of the warm smile I expected, Sarah's face was stone-cold serious. Her hands trembled slightly as she held up her phone, and my stomach dropped before she even spoke. She told everyone about the photos. About how my husband had been meeting someone behind my back throughout our entire engagement. The room went dead silent as she swiped through image after image on her phone, holding it up for everyone to see. There he was, my brand new husband, sitting across from a brunette woman at various coffee shops and restaurants over the past 8 months. I felt like I was drowning in my wedding dress. The beautiful beating suddenly felt heavy against my chest as I struggled to breathe. My parents' faces went pale at their table. His family looked mortified. The photographer stopped taking pictures. Even the waitstaff froze with their trays halfway to tables. My husband jumped up, knocking over his chair, denying everything frantically. But the photos were right there, timestamps and all. Sarah kept talking, her voice steady and cold, explaining how she'd been following him for weeks after getting suspicious about his secretive phone calls and mysterious errands. I ran right out of that reception hall in my heavy dress and uncomfortable shoes, past the horrified faces of 150 guests who'd come to celebrate what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Sarah called after me, but I couldn't bear to look at anyone. Update 1. The next few days were a blur of returned gifts, canceled honeymoon plans, and awkward phone calls from relatives who didn't know what to say. I moved back into my old apartment, which thankfully I hadn't given up yet since we were planning to find a new place together after the wedding. My husband kept calling, leaving voicemails begging me to let him explain. He swore the meetings were innocent, that the woman was just a friend from work helping him plan a surprise for me. But the photos Sarah showed looked intimate, leaning across tables, her hand on his arm, long conversations that clearly weren't about planning surprises. Sarah came by every day, bringing takeout and staying to help me sort through the mess. She'd hold me while I cried, making all the right supportive sounds, telling me I deserved so much better. She handled returning the gifts I couldn't face dealing with, fielded calls from curious friends, and even helped me find a good divorce attorney since we'd have to annul everything. But something felt off about how prepared she was for all of this. She had answers for everything, solutions ready before I even knew what questions to ask. When I mentioned it seemed weird that she'd been following him without telling me first, she just said she wanted to be absolutely sure before breaking my heart. 2 weeks after the wedding disaster, I was finally starting to feel like maybe I could breathe again. Sarah suggested we take a weekend trip to the coast to clear my head, and it sounded perfect. We rented a little cabin and spent the first day walking on the beach, eating ice cream, and talking about everything except my failed marriage. That's when I saw her. The brunette from the photos. She was working at the ice cream shop we'd been to, wearing a name tag and taking orders like any normal person. But when she saw me, her face went completely white. I confronted her right there, demanding to know who she was and why she'd been meeting with my husband. The poor girl looked terrified and confused, saying she had no idea what I was talking about. She'd never seen my husband before in her life. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. She mentioned getting paid for some photo shoots a few months back by a woman who looked exactly like Sarah. Professional headshots, she thought, for some kind of modeling portfolio. The woman had even asked her to wear specific outfits and pose in certain ways at different locations around town. Update 2. I felt sick realizing what this meant. I confronted Sarah back at the cabin that night, and at first she tried to deny everything. But when I pressed her with the details the ice cream shop girl had told me, she finally broke down. The truth was so much worse than I'd imagined. Sarah had orchestrated the entire thing. She'd hired that actress, staged all those photos, created this elaborate lie to destroy my marriage. But her reason was the part that really shattered me. She was in love with me. Had been for years, apparently. She couldn't stand watching me get married to someone else, so she decided to sabotage everything. She thought if she could prove my husband was cheating, I'd turn to her for comfort and maybe finally see her as more than just a friend. I was furious and heartbroken all over again, but this time the betrayal felt even deeper. This wasn't just about my marriage, this was about 15 years of friendship that had apparently meant something completely different to her than it did to me. Every supportive moment, every late-night conversation, every time she'd helped me through a breakup, had she been hoping I'd turn to her romantically? She begged me to understand, saying she'd never meant for it to go this far. She thought maybe she'd just show me a photo or two, make me question things, give her time to confess her feelings properly. But once she started, she couldn't stop. The lies kept building on each other until she was in too deep to back out. I left the cabin immediately, driving home alone while Sarah stayed behind crying. I needed space to process everything, to figure out how to move forward when both my marriage and my closest friendship had been built on lies. The drive home was the longest 3 hours of my life. I kept thinking about all the signs I'd missed, all the times Sarah had seemed a little too invested in my relationships, a little too quick to point out flaws in the guys I dated. Had she been sabotaging my love life for years without me realizing it? When I got home, there were 17 missed calls from my husband. I finally answered and we had the most honest conversation of our entire relationship. He was devastated about the photos, confused about why someone would frame him like that, and desperate to prove his innocence. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown where we used to go when we first started dating. He brought his phone, his laptop, credit card statements, anything that could prove his whereabouts during those supposed meetings. He even had his work schedule showing he was in meetings or at his desk during most of the times Sarah claimed he was with that actress. Looking through everything, it became clear that Sarah had been incredibly thorough in her deception. She'd photoshopped his face onto other photos, used pictures from his social media to create fake scenarios, and somehow made it all look convincing enough to fool a room full of wedding guests. But the most shocking discovery came when we were going through his phone records. Sarah had been calling and texting him for months, claiming she was planning surprise parties for me, asking about my schedule, finding out when he'd be alone so she could supposedly coordinate with other friends. She'd used his trust and his love for me to gather information for her scheme. Update 3. The betrayal felt endless. Every memory with Sarah was now tainted with doubt. Had she really been supportive when my previous boyfriend broke up with me, or had she somehow influenced that too? Was her encouragement to date my husband genuine, or part of some longer plan to eventually tear us apart? I decided to investigate further, reaching out to some of our mutual friends from college. What I discovered made my stomach turn. 3 different friends mentioned times when Sarah had shared negative stories about my boyfriends, small seeds of doubt that had seemed like protective concern at the time but now looked like manipulation. One friend remembered Sarah showing her photos of my ex-boyfriend talking to other women at parties, claiming she was worried about me getting hurt. Another recalled Sarah mentioning that different guys I'd dated had made inappropriate comments about other women when I wasn't around. Looking back, it seemed like Sarah had been systematically undermining my relationships for years. But the most devastating discovery came from my college roommate. She told me about a conversation she'd had with Sarah during my junior year when I was seriously dating someone Sarah particularly disliked. Sarah had confessed her feelings about me then, saying she was waiting for the right time to tell me, waiting for me to be single and ready to see her differently. That was over a decade ago. Sarah had been carrying this torch, manipulating my love life, and biding her time for more than 10 years. My husband and I started couples counseling, not because our relationship was broken, but because we needed help processing the trauma of having our wedding destroyed by lies. We had to rebuild trust that had been shattered not by each other, but by someone we'd both considered a close friend. The sessions helped us realize how strong our actual relationship was underneath all the chaos. We'd weathered this incredible betrayal together, supported each other through the investigation and discovery process, and come out more honest and connected than we'd ever been. We decided to have a small ceremony with just our immediate families, a do-over wedding that felt authentic and peaceful. This time, there were no surprises, no dramatic speeches, just quiet vows and the people who truly loved us both. Final update. Sarah tried to contact me dozens of times over the following months. She sent letters, emails, had mutual friends reach out on her behalf. She even showed up at my workplace once, begging for a chance to explain everything properly. But I couldn't see a path back to friendship with someone who'd spent years manipulating my life. The hardest part was losing not just Sarah but also the version of myself who had trusted so completely. I found myself questioning other friendships, wondering if anyone else had hidden motives or secret feelings they weren't sharing. It took time to learn how to trust my instincts again, to believe that most people in my life were genuine. My marriage became stronger than I ever imagined possible. Going through something so intense together, having to defend our love against such elaborate deception, proved that what we had was real and worth fighting for. We learned to communicate more openly, to share our doubts and fears instead of keeping them private. About a year later, I heard through mutual friends that Sarah had moved across the country. She'd apparently started seeing someone new and was trying to build a healthier relationship with appropriate boundaries. Part of me was glad she was getting help and moving forward, but I still couldn't bring myself to wish her well directly. The actress Sarah had hired reached out to apologize once she understood what had really happened. She felt terrible about her part in the deception, even though she'd been manipulated too. She offered to testify or provide any evidence we needed, but we decided we just wanted to move forward rather than pursue legal action. Looking back, I think the most important thing I learned was the difference between love and obsession. Sarah had convinced herself that her feelings were love, but real love doesn't involve deception and manipulation. Real love wants the other person to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. My husband and I celebrated our first real anniversary quietly, just the two of us at the same coffee shop where we'd worked through everything. We talked about how grateful we were that the truth had come out even in such a dramatic and painful way. Better to know who our real friends were than to live surrounded by beautiful lies. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if Sarah had just been honest about her feelings years ago. Maybe we could have worked through it like adults, maybe our friendship could have survived with proper boundaries. But I've learned that some people are so afraid of rejection that they choose manipulation instead of honesty, and that choice makes real relationship impossible. These days, I'm more careful about reading the signs when friendships feel unbalanced or when someone seems too invested in my personal choices. But I refuse to let Sarah's betrayal make me cynical about love and friendship in general. Most people are good, most friends are genuine, and most love stories don't involve elaborate deceptions. My marriage is built on truth now, messy and imperfect but completely real. And that feels like the best foundation for whatever comes next.